Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we're going to be taking a look at some drone footage of combat in Ukraine as purportedly Ukrainian special forces take out Russian multiple rocket launch systems. And we're going to be breaking down just why it seems like rocket artillery has become the talked about weapon system on the battlefield in Ukraine. Let's get into it. So as we've seen, this is a classic staple of Ukrainian indirect fire is to use drones as forward observers, spotters to locate enemy targets, feed locations to their artillery, and ensure and adjust fire to ensure consistent target destruction. Now, what you see here is, let's back it up a little bit. This is a good example of a mobile rocket artillery system. You can see it's towed by a truck, and the truck will simply tilt up its rocket battery and will fire the rockets out along the predetermined projectile. Now, some rockets are guided onto their target, but many of them are unguided rockets, dumb rockets, that are going to follow a predicted parabolic path and land in a target area. It's actually not that hard, especially given that in many cases, the bed of the truck, the actual rocket pod itself, can rotate both horizontally and vertically, ensuring that they can get the rockets at just the right angle and direction to hit the intended target. This also, because it's truck mounted and never has to be dismounted, it can be really hard to track these rocket systems because they don't need to be in position for more than a couple of hours, right, before they can move again. Sometimes even probably as little as like 2 hours in one location. It's a lot easier to track down an artillery battery where the howitzer has to be towed into place, deployed, fire direction center set up, and then fire missions have to be run. Right, artillery units will stay in place for a day or longer. These couple of hours, drive in, drive off. And you can see here the drone appears to have taken it out with just an explosive mounted to the drone. Right, this looks like we've seen other Ukrainian drones where they actually have a camera mounted and will release a small explosive. But the advantage is with taking out weapon systems, sometimes, especially rockets, all it takes is a little bit of damage to the engine and they won't be able to hit their intended target. Here's an example. It looks like this is probably artillery rounds that have just hit. This is a much larger detonation. There is another example right there of Ukrainian artillery. And we're going to see one more, I think. Oh, it's trying to do a BDA, a battle damage assessment. There is another system cooking off. And I find this pretty interesting how this commercial drone is warning that you might be in violation of your local airspace laws because you're above 50 meters. Rest assured, the airspace in Ukraine is best described as contested and almost certainly lawless. Yep, so like we've seen in other vehicles, oftentimes, oh, there we go. So that may have actually been, initially I thought it was a rocket actually launching, but it's not. It's the rocket engine appearing to deploy. See, and it fires that round off. That's the rocket artillery. They're going to be self-propelled. Now, what makes rocket artillery different from conventional artillery? Well, I'll break it down here. Okay, so when you have conventional artillery, it fires an artillery shell. It's out of a howitzer like the Paladin howitzer. Excuse me, there we go. There's an example of the Paladin. This is a self-propelled howitzer. So you can actually see in this sort of high-speed photo what's happening. It fires just like a big version of a gun, right? When you pull the trigger of a gun, the propellant in the gun goes off and it propels a projectile forward, right? There you can see it here, the M107, for example, the U.S. military's now standard 155 millimeter shell, right? You can see it's going to send a bunch, there's going to be a propellant charge that pushes this artillery round out, and then the round itself is loaded with explosive. So when it hits its target at the end of its flight trajectory, it's going to explode and send a bunch of shrapnel everywhere. In contrast, rocket artillery is a different animal. Rocket artillery fires a ballistic a rocket that still travels along a ballistic trajectory, but it's propelled long after it leaves the weapon system. It's like launching a little rocket ship. So what makes them so different? Well, in the US, our Paladin system can fire at a range of about 22 kilometers, 1 round a minute. The Russian equivalent, rough equivalent, the 2S-35 Kolytsia, my Russian is as bad as my Ukrainian, has a range of 40 kilometers, right? And can fire at a rate of 9 to 16 rounds a minute. So it can be a really effective tool inside of 40 kilometers. But if we look here, we can see that if the Russians control Lysychansk, let's just zoom out until we have a good 10-kilometer radius here. You can see if they control Lysychansk, their artillery, right, in Lysychansk will probably be able to reach out and touch like Svirsk, but it can't touch Sloviansk or Kramatorsk. Right? These are major hubs for these are probably major hubs for Ukrainian logistics and resupply, and they're well beyond the front lines. The front lines in Lysychansk, less so in these sort of more contested villages here. But the thought exercise remains valid. Now, when we look at rocket launch systems, rocket artillery systems, you get a lot more range because the round continues to be propelled long after it leaves the barrel. So the Russian 9A524 Tornado MLRS system can reach out 90 kilometers, right? The mid-range BM30 can do 70 or up to 90, right? 70 to 90. Of course, they have thermobaric rockets, which are much shorter range. But even their self-propelled artillery can reach, again, 45 to up to maybe 62 kilometers. So, what does that mean? That means that suddenly, if you're able to employ rocket artillery, these rear areas, supply depots, barracks, staging areas, maintenance yards in the Sloviansk or Kramatorsk area suddenly are in range of these rocket forces, which means that you've turned, if you're talking about 90 kilometers, this entire contested region is suddenly in range of Russian artillery. So it's really important that both sides try to bring as much rocket artillery to bear as possible. This is why Ukraine was so excited to get the HIMARS, because that is their own rocket artillery that they can use to reach targets into and beyond the Russian front lines. So I hope you guys understand now why it's such a big deal to see rocket artillery on the battlefield. If you want to see some breakdowns of combat videos that are just too brutal for YouTube, check out the Patreon. Link is in the description. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. I'll see you guys in the next one.